Urgency kind of correlates with grit, but urgency applied to everything, it makes anything that you're doing like 2 or 3 times more lethal, right? And I think about that a lot because everything that you were doing, like the faster you can get to day 0, that has exponential return on what day 30 looks like or day 365 looks like, right? And then it also gets you to failure and pivot, adjust, do something else as fast as possible. So urgency is like this characteristic that is really hard to nail down in somebody or understand if it exists in somebody, but is super valuable to your own efforts, to an organization, and beyond.
Hey, I'm David Eliku, and this is The Knowledge, a podcast for anyone obsessed with learning more and living better. In every episode, I speak with successful people from a variety of backgrounds to unpack everything they've learned about navigating the world around us. This week, I'm speaking with Colin Landforce, the Chief Technology Officer at Unrivaled Brands. This was a fantastic conversation because Colin has this insatiable drive to build and create things, and he clearly loves that feeling of building businesses from scratch. And so we talked all about his early forays into entrepreneurship, building things from high school and college and beyond, and then also this incredible journey of building a publicly traded cannabis company. And then finally, we also talked about this idea of building a brand around yourself and tenets of being able to find authenticity and being yourself and finding your voice and being able to share your truth with people and having people identify with that. So there's so much wrapped up in that, and this was a really fantastic episode. You can find Colin online on Twitter at Landforce, and you can check out his amazing podcast with his fellow co-hosts. It's the Builders.build podcast. You can find it wherever you listen to podcasts. If you love this episode, please engage with it, subscribe, share it with a friend, and most importantly, please don't forget to leave a review because it helps us tremendously to grow the show and reach other people just like you. Obviously, you've gone viral a few times and you talk a lot about the businesses that you guys run now, but I'd love to go way, way, way back and figure out, okay, where does this all come from? So have you always felt like you've been an entrepreneur? Have you always had that kind of self-starting spirit? And I know that you have this phrase that says builders build. Has that always been you from like a very young age, or is that something you've cultivated as you've gotten older?
Yeah, I'd say something I've refined, right? So I think, early on, initially it expresses itself as entrepreneurship, but I've done a lot of introspection on the topic and really centered around insecurity of being a jack of all trades, right?
Yeah.
Because I am a jack of all trades, and I've certainly had plenty of moments of like, what am I actually doing? What am I actually going to like specialize in? And for me, it all circled back to just creating. And like, I think of building as like creating something where there once was not, right? And so in terms of that, like, yeah, it started with Legos, right? And then as it manifested itself into business, which is the place where I'm lucky enough to like make a living and have a career building, early on, I think for a lot of entrepreneurs found themselves, promoting parties and this kind of thing. That was definitely, the first probably, I guess, 5-figure businesses I was doing was throwing parties and that kind of thing. But yeah, again, for me, it's like, it's building is the core tissue there at the end of the day. And yeah, had the usual CD burning in middle school and all those little hustles that I think are common amongst people of our age. And we ended up here. I wasn't concise. It never is for me, but
No. I love not being concise. I mean, yeah, let's dig into that. So, okay, so you're doing CD burning in middle. What's the first hustle that you remember having?
There's a couple like that. The first actual one was eBay drop shipping sneakers. I think was like the first thing. So that was, I'm sure we're all aware of like the fake sneaker world. And I was transparently, so like I was not getting one over on anybody, drop shipping from China Jordans and Nikes that were not actually Jordans and Nikes. That along with the party stuff. So one of the origins, again, going from just like random things into like, oh, this is a business, was when I was in high school, our school canceled all of our dances because they had gotten a little bit out of hand. And so all of a sudden there's all this pent up demand for a dance, a party, right? Amongst, 15, 16, 17-year-olds. And so we threw a party, and that was, that kind of like kicked into I guess a 4 or 5 year thing, starting in the middle of high school, bleeding into college and not quite beyond of just like promoter, DJ, and event stuff, which got pretty big. We threw like some of the biggest New Year's Eve parties in Portland a couple of years. It was always just like that business is a slippery slope in more ways than one. And I feel like, especially at that scale, doesn't ever really pan out. Like nightlife, you can hustle, you can make some money doing nightlife, but it kind of gets into a totally different ball game in terms of actually building a business there. And it was very transitory for me. It's like I'm in college, I was making better money than anybody I knew in college, but it never was gonna be a whole lot more than that, I think, in retrospect. Yeah. And so those were definitely the early things.
Cool. And how were you thinking about money at that time as well? Was it a thing where you were making money and saving it, or were you looking for ways to spend it, or were you thinking about maybe like reinvesting in other things? Was that something you were already having in mind?
I have a very fluid relationship with money, is probably a good way to put it. So yeah, like everything I've ever done is, I'm not a saver, right? At this point in my life, sure, I save, but I have a very, very fluid relationship with money. It is something that comes and something that goes. And I generally feel like at any given moment, you could probably strip me naked and throw me in the middle of a desert, and I'd be in a decent place 30 days later, right? So all of these things, whether is just like continue, keep the beast rolling, keep growing, and keep it moving.
Yeah. And so when you went to college, was the plan that you wanted to get some kind of job out of that? Or were you thinking, I mean, you're already making a lot of money, probably more than some people in their first graduate jobs. What were you thinking at that time?
I think I unfortunately went to college just because it was the next thing to do. And I ultimately didn't end up graduating. I think I was a term short. I don't know how many credits exactly, but I went to business school just because it was the next thing to do. And so the reason I ended up leaving is because I just had this moment of like, I'm not actually doing this. I can come back and do this at any point if it's what I want to do, but I'm going to go actually do things. And so I was reflecting the other week on college, and I think that the professional development class that I took that was really about writing and speaking is probably the most valuable college class that I took. And that class is, not business specific or any degree specific, right? I think all these things boil down to communication is like the most important skill set any of us can have, regardless of education. And yeah.
Yeah, I was just talking to someone about that. His name's David Bell. He was a guest on this podcast, actually. And we were talking about how realistically, I think sales or communication and being able to communicate clearly and being able to sell people on ideas is probably one of the biggest, highest leverage skills that you can develop wherever you get that, whether you're getting it doing door-to-door sales, whether you're getting it in school or selling things, or however you get and however you can build those skills, they unlock so many other things. Even writing as an example. Yeah. So I run this course on like career building and stuff. And I just talk about how learning to write and learning to write well and communicate ideas clearly, even if you're not in a position, it doesn't matter. You don't have to want to become a writer. You don't have to want to use that for the specific purpose, but you can apply that in so many other contexts. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And communicating and sales are obviously very closely related. And I totally agree.
So what did you end up doing coming out of college? Because I can imagine maybe you don't already know exactly what you're going into. I can assume you maybe spent some time experimenting.
Yeah. So immediately after that, I was building media websites. So, and this was I learned so much through that time. It was such a brutal grind, but I was building music-based blogs, basically. There are two of them in particular, and it was a hell of a grind. I feel like looking back, knowing what I know now, it could have gone very different, but I obviously didn't, and I generally feel like the obstacle is the way, so I learned a ton during that period, but honestly, coming out of it, I was dead broke and ended up just like kind of washing my hands of it. But the next thing I did from there was a text SaaS. So really like before text marketing was what it is today, I did a SaaS around that. And that was a grind, but learned a lot there as well.
Okay, sweet. So were you doing the coding of that business as well?
No, not at all. We had developers, but I mean, do you know much about the SMS space today?
Yeah, I know. I know a bit, but I'm sure you could probably educate me a bit more.
Are you familiar with Twilio?
Yes, yeah.
Yes. Okay. This was before Twilio. So we had burner phones connected to our servers, and we had literal phones sending the text and running our entire platform off of burners plugged into the servers in this tiny little office. So we were like literally ahead of our time, not necessarily in a good way on it, but it was great. We learned a lot, and it's really interesting looking back on like how prolific SMS is in the marketing landscape, and just like I guess not only marketing, right? Things like one-time passcodes and like really like the operation of products and especially digital products and websites these days is pretty interesting. But we were way ahead of our time, and that ended up bleeding into like an agency, right? Because we couldn't. It was very hard to make money doing that, and so very quickly all the people that we were selling on text marketing also needed all these other things, and so it very quickly morphed into an agency, and yeah.
Okay, sweet. So you built an agency, like a media agency, off the back of that?
Yeah, just all the usual suspects, right? Websites, social media, software development, like really just like for better or for worse, like the everything agency. And those are a different kind of grind, and did that for a while and ended up just stepping away from it to go pursue other things. But all experience is good experience.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's so interesting because I think a lot of the kind of entrepreneurial, scrappy types, or people that, like you say, jack of all trades, people that pick things up as they go along, you actually are picking up all the skills that you can leverage later on. So sometimes, even though you might not see in the moment how applicable this thing is, or you might have something that fails or doesn't pan out the way you expect it to, the lessons that you learned and the skills that you build ultimately pay off when you find something that you can apply them to.
Yeah, I totally agree. I genuinely do not ever look at any time I spent on anything as wasted time, even if it didn't pan out for that exact reason. If you're picking up game, if you're getting experience, to a certain degree, that's always going to be adding value, even if it doesn't seem like it in the moment.
Yeah. So how does the cannabis thing pan out? Like how do you get into that?
Yeah, so gosh, leading up to that, I was actually at like my only job, I think, as a young man at that point, and that was kind of coming to an end in a lot of ways. And I had a couple of friends that were, as the story goes, that were selling bulk flower to dispensaries, and I was just kind of like looking for what's next, and it was that. So I left that and jumped in, and the rest is history. I can't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, but I think the year following me leaving, we did like 3.5 or 4 million. It was largely bulk, just moving weight to dispensaries. But the end goal was always product, right? So the early days were just building a distribution network. Without distribution, nothing really matters, right? So building out that network so that we could ultimately sell whatever we landed on into that same network. And so the early days were just building that out and then figuring out what was next. And then we started developing brands and developing products and so on and so forth. And then I think 3 or 4 rounds of M&A later, here we are publicly traded through a merger and doing that at a bigger scale than 4 or 5 years ago when it all started.
That's awesome. Give me an idea of how easy or difficult was it scaling in those early days? Because I think people... There's 2 things, right? So people obviously see your journey and see everything that you've done. And there are people that will want to replicate that, whether it's in the same industry or in others, and people will see that as an example. And, was it easy being able to scale the distribution? Or also maybe give me an idea of like how this fits in from a legislation perspective. Was this like soon after it was starting to become legalized in a lot of places? Was it super early, or was it you could already see some examples of what this was going to look like in some other areas?
Yeah, well, I think there are a couple angles on it. One is, especially early days, we're basically talking low margin distribution business. And those are really hard from a cash flow standpoint, right? As you grow, you need exponentially more cash, and it's low margin, so cash is hard to come by. And that's if collections are perfect and business is good, right? And then you add on to it the cannabis dynamic. And And so outside of regulation and licenses and the hoops that have to be jumped through there, which vary a lot market to market, cannabis in open markets, which is what the West Coast, all the West Coast states are open license states, which means that more or less if you want a license and you want to be in business, you can be, which means it's an absolute bloodbath. Like I don't think there are very many industries that are more competitive than West Coast cannabis. And so you add that onto that and it's absolutely been a bloodbath. It's very, very difficult. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. But the advice I do give is that cannabis is exciting. There is, and there will continue to be a huge growth curve in cannabis. And my favorite lane, and if I was like stepping away now, but then wanted to get into cannabis, I would be getting into ancillary businesses that service cannabis, right? Like like a marketing agency, an electrician, all this boring stuff that basically has like the same growth potential as cannabis, but it's just the nuts and bolts, right? And it's like the electrician gets paid whether or not the price of the flower being grown there plummets and kills the business that's running it. The electrician who ran the wires gets the check every single time, right? Because you don't get to grow the weed without that. And I think there's huge opportunities to just niche into cannabis with all these boring businesses isn't the word, but like run of the mill businesses, right? That's my pitch on the cannabis industry. Stay away.
Yeah, no, I completely get that. It's not always the big sexy thing, right? Like there's so many small niches and so many small opportunities that people often miss just because they are literally looking to replicate whatever it is that they've seen. So one other question that I had is kind of going off the back of what you were saying, which is really about when you're there in those very early days, you haven't necessarily done something exactly like this before. How much did you need to learn in order to be competent? Because I think you see the story a lot of people get onto something good and they don't even know how to cope with it. And there's too much demand, there's too much going on, and they can burn out very quickly. But obviously you guys were able to keep going for the long haul and actually make it work, and you were able to learn whatever it is that you needed to learn at the exact right time to be able to keep things going.
Right. So I think to a certain degree, that's the nature of any startup, because even in an established industry, you don't really know what to expect until that first punch, right? And then all hell breaks loose. So I think startup life in general is kind of built that way. For cannabis, it gets extra special because, I think in the case of us, so like especially early days, but also now a big part of our business is the distribution businesses, and distribution is an afterthought to regulators, right? When the regulators sit down at the state level to go, okay, so we need to figure out rules and licensing for stores, and then the people that grow it, and then the people that make the products, right? Like generally speaking, all the regulation around moving it and getting it from A to B was like a total afterthought. So in addition to, okay, you're learning about the compliance, the hoops you have to jump through, and then you're learning the software that runs that, which is also like pretty half-baked. There's also just like gaps in this stuff where there is no way to do it, right? And it's pretty daunting when you're talking about like compliance and regulation to go like, okay, so we don't have a way to do this. So just like do it the same way every time. So once we figure it out, at least we'll know that you were being intentional about it, right? It's like you have a lot of moments like that, even in the sectors that are more sorted out, like a retail, but then even there, right? So you don't get to just use a normal POS solution for a retail store, right? You're using things that are addressing, both the compliance side of the industry as well as just the nuance of cannabis, which there is plenty. That means all these softwares are new. There's not a single player in the cannabis space that's like a big player in software that has been around very long, because it hasn't been around very long from a like recreational market standpoint, which means that all of these things, all of the utilities that any other industry takes for granted are like being rapidly developed by teams that are generally fighting the same fires as you, and grappling with the ever-changing legislation just like you are, and so on and so forth. So it's like startup vibes on like 5,000, honestly.
Yeah, I can imagine, particularly within that kind of industry. Did you find any trouble with, in terms of hiring, like finding the right people that were not just there because it was an interesting industry to be in, but people that could actually do what you needed and to help you scale in the right way?
There's a really interesting dichotomy of people getting into cannabis between like people that just want to do cannabis but don't particularly have any experience outside of it. And then people that have a ton of experience in a thing and want to get into cannabis and apply that, right? So early on for us, our whole thing was not hiring from within cannabis. Our thinking was that you can teach somebody about cannabis, you can't teach them to like show up on time. Right.
Right.
Those are inherent traits. So especially from a sales perspective, right? Like we wanted to bring in people that were great at boots on the ground B2B sales and then teach them cannabis. Now, fast forward a few years, now it's like I'd much rather hire a sales rep that has a book of business and has existing relationships. So that's kind of flipped on its head. And then in a totally different light, we had somebody applying for a job like on our manufacturing line who had like 2 master's degrees from like Yale and Harvard, like in like theoretical something or other. And again, this is just somebody that they just want to be around weed. They just want to do weed, which is a bizarre thing to deal with, right? It's not your run of the mill manufacturing team member. So it's really all over the board. I think, not to give like a cliche answer, but it's kind of boiled down to just like, it just has to be right. A super seasoned manufacturing leader is not going to be able to come in and figure out a cannabis supply chain overnight, because there's nothing like it in the world. And so all these things are like, you have to find people that kind of like have some of the structure and core competencies from the spaces that they work in, but are flexible and crazy enough to go figure out how that applies to cannabis and how it doesn't, because nothing is cookie cutter in it.
How have you found adapting to the leadership side of things in terms of actually having to help run this company as you're growing? Because I think it's very different. You get 2 kinds, maybe like 2 types in my mind. There's a lot of people that, don't necessarily have any corporate experience or startup experience, but they're able to maybe build something small and it stays relatively lean, like, in the tens of people. And then I think on the flip side, you also have some founders that maybe they've worked in some other startups before and they've seen things scale and they've maybe worked in corporates or in consulting or something else and they have some of that experience. How did you find that if you didn't necessarily, it's not like you had spent years and years within previous startups to be able to see examples of, like how to lead effectively and how to help the business to scale well?
Yeah, I think that's another place where I think there's a lot of like management skills that can be taught from a leadership and communication standpoint. I think a lot of that is you have it or you don't. And so a lot of like our, I guess technically what might be considered middle management, but I'd like a lot of the leaders in our business have just been brought up through the ranks, because a lot of the intangibles, like you need so much leadership on the ground with how fast things change in this. And the reality is that's like not going to come from someone who's like led a large team at Deloitte. It's going to come from someone who knows this stuff, who understands the struggles of the people on their team and the people around them, but then happens to have the communication skills and just these intrinsic leadership skills to piece that together. I don't know. Again, this feels like cliche answers, right? But it's so true. And I've seen so many people come into cannabis with traditional experience in X that just get burned by the nuance, and without being able to, not literally speak the language, but like understand the language, the rest doesn't matter a lot of the time at the end of the day.
Yeah, I get that. And so do you think things have changed a lot? Obviously, like you mentioned, you've had the merger, you're now publicly traded. How different is that to where you'd been before? And obviously like having gone through that whole process.
Yeah, I think there's definitely just additional layers, right? All the other nuance and complexity still exists every day. And then you have new layers. You have the public market layer. Like you, as you're fighting through the daily firefights and operating the business and growing the business, there's also this layer of like, where's the share price, right? And these kind of things. And I think we're fortunate enough where, we have people who like, that's how they spend most of their lives. That's not how I spend most of my life. I've learned a ton about it. But I think the primary value, I think that a lot of the value that I in general bring is being able to bridge that gap, right? Like I've been the drug dealer and I can also play the suit, and I'm really like not either one of them at the end of the day. So connecting the dots between two of those and like facilitating both of those operating, right? Because, we have salespeople that like they were selling to their customers when this was totally illegal, right? And then we have the board of directors and the public markets to think about. And all of this is just a matrix of connecting dots and making sure that those things can play well together and communicate with each other and understand each other.
How have you found building this with also managing your personal life as well? I know that you're crazy about being a dad and having your family, and how do you find balancing that side of your life as well? Because I know there's loads of people, when you think of a CTO of a public traded company, there are people that their whole lives get sucked into work and whatever it is that they're doing. And, they have to pick up their phone whenever it rings at all times of the night and do all of those things. So how do you find that balance?
Right. I mean, it's tricky. I have I'm fortunate enough that I have a very serious, nothing else actually matters outside of that little being that I am so fortunate to have in my life, right? So I definitely, there are moments where it's an all hours thing, right? And there are moments of conflict in my personal life because of how much, for me, the hardest part is just being able to block out the rest of that when I have that time and get present. And how hard that is kind of varies with what's going on in the business and just what dynamics I'm dealing with during the day. But I think the content of, said phone call or getting those emails, the content of those aside, it's not that different from just balancing, entrepreneurship, where you take ownership of everything, you care about everything, and you want to be available, whether it's a partner or somebody on your team or one of your colleagues or one of your peers, that want or need to be available and not actually shut off is an entrepreneurship thing as much as it is anything else. And at the end of the day, when we talk personal life, I think I have building things, and then I have my kid and my family, and I don't need anything besides those things, which I think makes it simpler. I'm not trying to hang out with the boys and watch the game and all these things. I do that with my sidekick. And so I think in a lot of ways it's a lot easier to balance it when it's just two pieces than when it is, a social life and all these other things. I got my kid and I got building, right? And that simplifies it a little bit.
Sure. I saw quite recently you did a thread. I think you were talking about how your barber could make an extra 40K by starting a small business on the side. And it's funny because you see some of the responses and, okay, I think you get two sides. There's one group of people that are like, oh my gosh, I need to run out and do this. I'm going to start my own pomade company. I'm going to do exactly what you just said. And then you also get people that nitpick and they're like, oh my gosh, but what about this? What about that? And what do you think it is that people just don't get about entrepreneurship? Because it's not for everyone, right? There are plenty of people that were in your situation however many years ago that were in college that would have been too scared to drop out like you did. And they would have been too worried about what the future would look like. They would have been too focused on all these other things. And then they end up just going into whatever job that they think is right and whatever they think is the next step. What do you think it is about maybe your experience or the way you think that makes you able to take that step?
It's a very existential question, but I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. Because it's something that I want to make sure I can instill in my daughter, and not entrepreneurship, but really just exactly what it is that you want to do and bring to the world. I want to make sure that my daughter is in a position to do that and doesn't feel blocked by technicalities or whatever it is. And I think that the biggest thing, again, and kind of trying to dissect this so that I can apply it to my parenting, is just I was so fortunate to have parents that never told me I had to do anything except for remember who I am and who I represent and follow through on commitments you make to other people, right? It was never oh, you need to do sports, you need to take music lessons. It was none of that. It was do exactly what you want to do every single day and just be responsible and meet your commitments. And I think that that's kind of at the core of how I ended up here. That, along with some crazy tick where I love making things and building things. And I think that I feel super, super blessed to have that kind of at in the deepest of depths in terms of the core of my psyche and personality. And I think it's something that my parents gave me without particularly realizing it. But that's something that I try and push onto my daughter, which, if you kind of backtrack on what I just said, is push nothing. My kid will be exactly what she wants to be and nothing else. And so when I see that kind of stuff, I I like kind of, I think it's fear if I had to diagnose it. I used to have this really like flippant and like kind of asshole reaction to it. But I think at the end of the day, it's people that are like overcomplicating those things are just like figuring out why, all the reasons why that wouldn't actually work, which is a huge bummer, I think, at the end of the day. It's also, like you said, like it's not, making things isn't for everybody. Like there has to be accountants too, and it's fine.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's really powerful, and I'm glad that you are taking that approach with your daughter, because I think not everyone gets that. And I think, just like you say, so many people are driven by fear. I think it's a real societal thing that we are taught that there's pretty much one way to go through life. And I think it's the scarcity of like how much time you have, right? So you don't want to make a mistake. You want to get everything right. You want to pick the options that you think will give you the most, the least possibility of failure. And so right. With entrepreneurship, with building things, there is a big opportunity for failure. But right. I mean, I guess it's about, there's a big opportunity for success, but there's also a big opportunity to fail. And you might have to restart. You might even, like you shared, like there's a few different things that you've tried. Some of them haven't panned out exactly the way you want them to, but eventually you can strike gold and you can find something that works, and you can scale it. You can apply all of those lessons that you've been building up. But I think unless you are willing to make that bet and to at least try, then you won't have either. You can't have the big success if you're not willing to risk the big failure. And it's the same even with investing, right? Like if there's a lot of people that want to make big money, let's say on crypto or in whatever area, but they are not comfortable with big losses.
Right.
People lose they want to have 20, 50% margin in terms of like their investment going up. But if their investment goes down like 10%,
they're selling. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
They're selling.
I think, on one hand, it's risk profile, right? Like I have a very, very different risk profile in terms of like what I'm comfortable with than anybody else. Then to go a little bit deeper than that, it's like, what is risk? I don't care if I try something and fail. Like it is like not an important part of my life, right? And I think that guides that risk tolerance. That like, what is failing? The investment example is like obviously very, very different. But for me, in trying something, it's like I don't have my self-confidence wrapped up in whether or not idea X works. So in a lot of cases, there's like very little, if any, risk at all. And then you add on top of that I have a very high tolerance for risk, and it's like, yeah, why not go to the moon, right?
Yeah, exactly. So is there anything else you're interested in building? I know that you're helping with your wife's e-com business.
For better or for worse, there's almost nothing I'm not interested in building. My wife's business is crushing it. I think she got like 20 sales yesterday, but awesome. She's crushing it. I'm very thankful that me weighing in or having opinions and helping here and there has not created strain on our relationship, because it certainly could. But she's taking it at her speed. It's going well. I tell her at least once a week that this is $1 million a year business and we need to, pour some gas on the fire and make it happen. But she's like learning stuff every day and figuring it out and taking her own approach to it. And it's awesome. She's having a lot of luck with TikTok, which is, was new to me a few months ago, but it's like driving all of her growth right now. And it's cool to watch.
What's she selling?
So my wife is half Chinese, and we got totally lucky in finding this thing, but it is, a lot of people of Eastern Asian descent have like a missing enzyme or something where when they drink alcohol, they turn red. And they also, in addition to turning red, it's like a bunch of other bad things happen, right? Like it's like a immediate hangover and X and Y and Z. She could tell you all about it. And so she has this patch product, a topical patch product that basically is packed with vitamins to counteract that. And so it varies drastically on people that try it. And actually there are a lot of Caucasian folks that also deal with this. It's just predominantly Eastern Asian. But basically you put that sucker on before you drink. And for some people it's night and day. For some people it helps a little bit. But we totally randomly stumbled into buying it from a kid who had created it. And she's been dealing with this since she was, in college and first started drinking. And we're not drinkers by any means, but it's like, for a lot of people, it's like literally like you take a sip of wine and like
Yeah.
you start glowing and you get a headache immediately. And so it's a pretty incredible product for the people it works for, and it lines right up with something she knows very well. So it's really a perfect e-com business for her.
Yeah, exactly. I know exactly what you mean. I spent some time working in Shanghai, and I've traveled quite a bit in East Asia. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, it's brutal.
that's really cool though. It's great that you were able to do that. I mean, not necessarily together, like it's our business, but I think having, obviously you've had your experience and you're able to input, and like you say, something that doesn't, interfere with your relationship at all. Because I think that's the other part that people struggle with. I know loads of people that maybe were couples. I think, okay, Canva's probably the great example. I think they're a couple.
Right.
But it doesn't always work out that way.
Yeah, right. Yeah, seriously. I keep banging on her to put the product into a fulfillment center, like ship them all the inventory, let them fulfill the orders. And she's still fulfilling them in our house, and then asked me to take them to the post office on Saturdays. So we get a good laugh of that I'm the fulfillment center. But yeah, we'll get there.
Is there anything else that you're building or trying to build?
Man, nothing serious, right? I try and keep most of my days focused on the one, but I've got a couple little passive things. Like I'm just like, when I have ideas, I need to act on them, right? So I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but like I've got a handful of these little things that, are either, I think that this Twitter app that I made that is like what I do all my writing in Twitter on, because I work on Twitter fairly seriously. It's got like 700 users, and like it's free. None of them are paying. It's not like bringing in money, but it's like, I like improve it and work on it, at least a couple times a week, and some other people are using it. So that's more of just like a scratching my own itch thing. And then I've got a little, I'm not sure if you call it a SaaS, but I used to be really, not used to. I like basketball cards. I'm not currently in a phase where I'm buying basketball cards, but when I was more seriously, I created a little tool for that like makes, it's doing like a couple $1,000 a month, and it's something that every now and then I tinker with and try to improve the product, but it's just kind of trucking along. But besides that, we've been working on the podcast, which has been, as we were talking about before we started going, a journey in itself and learning how that works. And it was a grind. We weren't growing at all. We kind of rebranded it into Builders.build and changed the format. And since then it's been going much better, but it's still a grind, and it's still, every day trying to get to like, what does the A+ podcast look like, and how can I execute on it without, the mega studio and the team and all that. So that's the other one that's taken up, some hours every week.
Yeah, exactly. I definitely feel you on the podcast thing. But even in building generally, I think so much of what you said, I get it completely. I think I'm the same. I just love building stuff. And it's funny. It goes back to what you were saying about being a jack of all trades as well. There's so many people that are, maybe it's just different types of people, but loads of people talk about, oh my gosh, you need to focus. And, the only way to be successful is if you just only do one thing and you focus on one thing, and you're not allowed to try all these other things. And I just try stuff like for fun. I do this podcast. I do take this seriously, and I have a business that I do take seriously. But I also start a bunch of other businesses. Like I started a coffee business because I kind of wanted to, partly because I wanted to solve a problem with like selling with African coffee, but it's also because I thought it would be cool. And so I do.
Yeah.
And and it doesn't take up a huge part of my life because I've organized it that way and I built it in a way that's sustainable. And it just exists. Like I can scale it up and down whenever I want to do more marketing, but I can just do that. And then I started a wine thing. It's so funny. Again, it's one of those things. I mean, it would be cool. I started it. So originally I was doing this entrepreneurship program thing, and they gave us a challenge to make, 1K in, I think, 2 weeks. And so obviously I had to think of like a way to do that. And I literally just did the mock-up of a bottle of wine. I just talked about it on Twitter. And I think it was literally 8 days or 12 days. So, okay, on the first day, I just tweeted about it and I was like, okay, if I started selling wine, would anyone be interested? And then 4 days later, I came back with mock-ups and I was like, okay, this is the wine. You want it?
We're doing the wine.
Yeah. I just built a landing page. I had mock-ups of it. I didn't actually have it yet. I mean, I'd been speaking to people to get it, but I didn't have it. It wasn't done, but I just had like the mock-up that I made. And I just did pre-orders and I sold, I think maybe about 3K in the next 4 days. So we're already profitable. And so now I can use the money to go and buy, the wine. Yeah, exactly. And so that's another thing where, I don't know, when I feel like it, I can just order another 100 couple hundred bottles and sell those and whatever. So I think it's cool being able to just experiment and try things and to like play in different spaces.
Amen. Same energy, man. That's kind of the, I like you pointed out, I say builders build a lot. That's my thing, my tag, and it's that exact energy. It's like just, you don't have to ask anybody for anything. And I think it lines up with the jack of all trades thing. You follow the traditional path and you go through school and you come out the other end without any, especially business school, without anything tangible to work with. And then if you go and level yourself up a little bit, figure out Photoshop and figure out how to do a WordPress site and how to turn on a camera and record an audio file for a podcast, all of a sudden, like there's almost like nothing that you can't at least get the ball rolling on. And that just gives you a ton of optionality. Like, like you just listed 3 things where tomorrow, if you wanted to go and scale something to $10 million a year, like you got your pick of the litter without even having to start from scratch. I love it.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the thing as well, because you give yourself options just by trying things. And if they fail, I mean, it fails, but you just plan it in a way that you can keep yourself alive and it doesn't have to take up all your time and all your energy.
Yep. Amen. Love it.
One other question I had. So I know that we talked about like communication being a key skill. Is there anything else that you can think of that in all the things that you've built and the things that you've tried that is super high leverage? I'm thinking just as an example to people that might be listening to this and thinking, they might want to build something. Like, what are the key skills that you think that you can develop that will mean that you can execute well?
All right. I got 2 answers here. One is like tactical skill and one is like characteristic that I think is especially good to look for in someone else if you're trying to find somebody to build with. But tactical skill is web. And by web, I don't mean web design, but I mean being able to execute a presence on the internet and do things there, right? Like being able to go from 0 to 100 on, there is a website, it is optimized for SEO, I'm getting traffic, yada, 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 right? That is, and it lines up very closely with the design thing, but it's way more functional than that. And then in terms of something a little bit more abstract, I think urgency is like kind of correlates with grit, but urgency applied to everything, it makes anything that you're doing like 2 or 3 times more lethal, right? And I think about that a lot because everything that you're doing, like the faster you can get to day 0, it has exponential return on what day 30 looks like or day 365 looks like, right? And then it also gets you to failure and pivot, adjust, do something else as fast as possible. So urgency is like this characteristic that is really hard to nail down in somebody or like really like understand if it exists in somebody, but is like super valuable to your own efforts, to an organization and beyond.
Yeah, I think those 2 things are hugely connected. And I love that you brought that up. And it made me think, there's something I was thinking about earlier. It's just this fact that so many people, it's almost like, okay, imagine you're baking, like you're trying to make a cake and people are imagining how much sugar they should put without actually trying it. Like people don't actually do the experimentation of trying to like create the perfect recipe. You've got to fail a couple times. You've got to try it a couple times and see what works, see what doesn't work. But people would sit down first and try and imagine exactly how the perfect cake might look. Yeah, right. Exactly. And then if they don't think it's possible, then they already give up.
Right. For me, another breakthrough is the awareness that whoever wrote that recipe, they didn't wake up in the morning and know that it was 10 grams of sugar, right? They got there by trying 9 or 8 or 20 or yada, 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 right? And nobody wakes up in the morning, with a skill or with this knowledge. Shout out to the Knowledge Podcast. Everybody gets there by trying it and figuring it out, right? And that's a really powerful thing to wrap your mind around.
Yeah, and I think the speed thing is particularly important. And like you mentioned, getting to the first failure as quickly as possible. I think the faster you can figure out which part will not work or which part you need to change, the faster you can adapt. Whereas some people, if you keep kicking the can down the road and keep thinking, okay, I'm eventually going to try it, or even if you do start trying it, but you start really slow, you're not trying to scale it up, it doesn't have to take all your time, but at least trying to hit that velocity as quickly as possible. And it takes reps as well, because literally what you were just saying, it made me think, funnily enough, it's not something I've shared, but this is something that I had been practicing for so long, almost, and I have like one of my notebooks, I could even get it and show you. But anytime I had a business idea, I would give myself maybe 2 weeks and just try and go from, okay, I have the idea. Okay, what would the business look like? I'm writing it all down. I try and build a landing page. I design the logo. I do a bunch of stuff. I get the domains, all of that stuff. Like, how quickly can I go from zero to it's there? And it doesn't mean that I have to launch it. It doesn't mean that, that has to be a thing, but it's just practicing that rep of like going from idea to something is done and something is out there. And so funnily enough, okay, even the coffee thing, I had that original idea in 2018. I think I launched it in 2020. I had already had the idea and done that whole thing, like designed a logo, did a website, bought domains, did all that. And then I just sat on it. Like it's not something that I was ready to launch at that time, but because I had been doing that practice, then when I did want to launch it, it took 2 weeks. It just took like, I think pretty much the same thing with the wine. I said, hey, pre-orders, gave myself 2 weeks to build the website and then launched it. And it's done because you have that practice of doing it.
Right. Love it. Love it. Same energy. For me, I use this more as a filter on ideas than, like you said, to get practice. But when I have something, I buy the domain and I don't set it to auto renew. So it will expire a year later. And that gives me a year to decide if it's something that I ever want to see again. Otherwise, all of a sudden you get 10 years down the road and you got 140 domains on auto renew. And that adds up pretty quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're right with that. I do have, I've got a ton of domains, but I mean, I don't know. There's a balance though, because no, you're right. It's a filter for the good quality ideas because it will make sure that if it's something worth acting on, you'll act on it immediately. And so I think it solves for the procrastination part of it. But one thing I do like about just having those sprints and keeping things on the backlog is that sometimes, I don't know, like if I feel like launching something, if I ever got to a point where, okay, for example, I've got a skincare thing. If I ever wanted to get into that, I've got the business plan. I've got the logo design. I've got all of that somewhere in my backlog. If I wanted to get into something that looks like that, I've got it done. If I wanted to get into, I don't know, like making suits, I've got that. If I wanted to get into, like, there's a bunch of stuff that I don't have to do it now. I've got my hands full. I've got enough things I'm doing now, but it's cool. Well, I enjoy having a backlog of actually thinking through the ideas, because I think that's another thing that people don't do, is that as much as I mentioned people trying to figure out what the recipe looks like, I think people don't think things through fully at the same time. People just have an idea and they say, wouldn't it be cool? But they don't actually think about, okay, what does distribution look like? Go and research, go and find some factories. Like, how would you get this made? How would you do this? How would you do that? And so I think it can be useful actually trying to think about all those things and giving your mind that exercise. And then, like you say, I think, it can be good to then give yourself a year and figure it out and see if you can launch it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how are you finding on social media, like managing your presence? Because you talked about like web being a thing and being able to grow and manage a presence and being able to use it. How are you finding managing that? Because I think it can go one of two ways. One, in terms of the maybe negatives, is perhaps like being pigeonholed into whatever particular thing you started doing. And then also maybe some people don't always like the recognizability and everyone knowing who you are, or like trying to look into you, or all of that stuff. And then also I think sometimes maybe you say something, you say the wrong thing, and then everyone's on your back. And so there's all of that. So how do you manage trying to like build and grow your presence in the right way?
Well, I struggle a lot with like pigeonholing myself into any particular thing. So I'm a little bit more than a year into doing content on the internet, building personal brand. I wanted to forever. For a lot of reasons I didn't. I think the biggest one was realizing that all you have to do is just start creating stuff. It actually doesn't matter like how you position yourself or how great of a website you make, that the start of it all is just talking. But honestly, like, it's a huge focus for me. It's incredibly valuable. Like, it's weird to realize that like there's probably very few things that I could do that are higher leverage than like putting some energy into like creating some content for, my weapon of choice is Twitter for the time being. But I have been and continue to really struggle with the box or I guess my lack of a niche, right? For me, it's realizing that like doing this and talking a lot, like there's no way I can do that and only talk about one thing. It's not who I am. It's not how I'm wired, right? And kind of like bizarrely, that makes talking a lot and doing it a lot that much harder, right? Because it's like you feel like you're all over the place. I generally feel like everything I do is like very, very scattered. I would be confused if I followed me. And so a lot of it has been like trying to figure out how, we talk about focus. I think a lot of times focus is framing. So we can sit here and say like, oh, I'm not focused because I do X, Y, and Z. It's like, well, the thing I'm actually focused on is like the intersection of, or like how those pieces come together. And I think that's a lot of the value in being a jack of all trades, right? Is like, look, it's not that if you're a jack of all trades, you can also go and be an amazing designer and a fantastic, web person and like yada, yada, yada. It's actually that you can connect all of those dots, right? And so for me in figuring out my content and my personal brand online, it's been about like, how do I like form this into like my niche being connecting those dots? And for me, that levels back up to building. Like my niche is building things, right? And there's all kinds of things that you can build, right? And it's very, very jack of all trades is like at the core of that. But I'm still trying to figure out how to bottle that up and talk about it and be comfortable with it and do good tweets. I haven't figured it out yet.
Do you think there's a specific end goal of that, or is it just being able to have a platform that you can leverage?
I think I hate the whole like building an audience thing, but obviously that's what we do, right? And you can just do anything. Like the optionality that I have today compared to a year ago is maybe 18 months ago is crazy. And I know, talking to someone here who has like launched a wine brand on a whim or a coffee brand on a whim, it's like, you get it. You can like, I can do anything. Not to mention the people that I meet from it and the network that I can create from it. I was just thinking the other day, like, oh, I want to do another round of doing a bunch of podcasts, right? This is independent of you hitting me up, and it's like I could tweet right now, like, hey, what do you do a podcast? I want to be on it, and I could book 10 podcasts over the next 3 weeks. And I'm not sure if that's how I want to use my time over the next 3 weeks. It's probably not, but having that optionality to go and like get a message out if I had something to promote or whatever it may be is incredibly powerful. And, I use the example of that Twitter app that I tinker with and am building earlier here. It's like I did a little thread about how I was building this Twitter app to scratch my own itch, and it got 500 users overnight. Right? Like, yeah. That's the power of doing this. And so it is well worth my time and anyone's time who decides to do it. Most people are not up for the grind. Most people do a little bit of it and it doesn't catch, and that's what it is. And yeah.
Yeah. How do you think you do it from scratch? Because I think that's the other part of it where I completely get you. I think it's hugely useful, but I think there's also a slight difference between, I'll speak for myself and I'll let you answer. I think there's the part where you're actually adding tangible value. Because what I see that's happening on Twitter a lot now, particularly now more so, where I think people are starting to see the effect of people building brands, is you get a lot of people just, but in a fake way, just like a very scammy, like, I don't know, copying threads and just doing all of this stuff. And you're not actually doing anything. You're not actually doing any work. You're not putting anything out there that's useful to people. You're just doing it for the sake of doing it.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree. I was actually talking with somebody who is big in the audience builder space in kind of what you're talking about, and who I like and respect. I wouldn't do what he's doing, but it's fine. I get it. But what I told him is that like, I'm only interested in doing things that only I can do. Right. And that includes like in the building and the work that I do, but also in the content that I do. So that for me really changes. Like I could go do a thread. Like I see this person did this thread and they got 10,000 likes. Like I could go and like hack that, use it as a template and go and get that. And I've like experimented with that honestly, but I only want to be doing, in the case of a thread that only Colin can do. And if you step back from that, it's like, that is things like personality in the way that I write, but it's also what I write about, right? And what that means is I'm probably not going to be like, here's 10 great SaaS tools that if you don't use these 10 tools, your productivity will fall off a cliff and you'll die, thread. Like I'm not going to be that guy because anybody can be. And that's kind of my guiding light on all this stuff. And I'm well aware that like I could probably grow a bigger audience and do it faster if I went down that path. I watched a lot of people do it, and I'm doing fine with how I am, and gonna keep figuring out how to do stuff that only I can do that's valuable and that I feel awesome about.
I love that. How do you find the process of finding your voice? Because I think that's one thing that I wouldn't say struggle with. So I mostly do writing, like not just tweets, like actual writing, like off Twitter.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you know what I mean. But like,
yeah,
I don't know. I enjoy writing, but I think even with that, it took a lot of iteration for me personally, where I feel like you have to write enough to get out all the copying out of you. Like whatever is influencing you, whatever it is that you've seen, at least in my view, I feel like I had to write enough to figure out what felt unique to me and what actually felt authentic. And I'm interested to know like how you find being able to find your voice, particularly in a space where Twitter, where you're shown things a lot. And so it can be quite easy to fall into this trap of just doing whatever's popular, doing what other people are doing. If people are doing
stuff that gets likes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, so for me, I've always liked writing. However, it turned out most of my writing up until 18 months ago was in emails, right? And with work, right? I always liked the act of writing. It was just all inside work emails or, emails, right? So the biggest thing for me, I think, has been like stopping trying to craft what that voice is. And just, I guess at the end of the day, this sounds cliche, but just being myself, right? It's way easier to find your voice when you let it just be your voice. And if you are super concerned with like how many likes you get on a tweet and making sure the engagement is popping, then it's a lot harder to, go and show that voice on Twitter. But I think that a lot of that is futile, even though it can work. And so for me, it's just been all about being myself and, and accepting like I'm a little bit crazy. My written word is sometimes a little fragmented because I've spent so much time communicating over instant messenger with developers who don't speak English as a first language. So my written word is like always a little bit clunky. I love rap. It's the only music I've ever listened to. That is a big part of who I am, and that I'm not going to like try and shield and like act like I'm a suit on Twitter and talk about KPIs. Like I might mention that, but I'm going to do it in my own way. And so I guess there's nothing tactical there, but it's just like being David, being Colin, like being me, and not trying to be this manufactured version of you so that you can like look cool or be get as much engagement as possible. Because again, I think that comes back to like anybody can go and manufacture a voice, right? And like you are the one that can do your voice. I'm the one that can do my voice. And that's something that we have that no one can take away or no one else can do. And so I think the long game is just doing your voice. Just do it, rip it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, man. And like you say, builders build. I think it's so easy to tell the people that are actually out there building stuff and doing things in real life. You can recognize those people. There's a huge difference between the people that are actually doing stuff in day-to-day life and the people that just talk about doing stuff. And the people that, there's so many people that can build profiles around being consulting on something, but not actually doing that thing. And there's people that want to teach you how to do something, but they're not actually doing that thing. And they're not building in the space. They don't have the experience doing the thing, but they want to talk about it. And they can build the profile that looks like the thing, but they're not actually doing the thing. And I think it's completely different.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's just anybody can do that.
Yeah.
Like you got to come back to stuff that only you can do. And like the best use of anyone's time is doing things that they are uniquely qualified to do that nobody else can do. And I think that the same goes for just like putting things on the internet and adding value to the world in that way.
Yeah.
And hopefully it is value. Some of it won't be. Some of it's just going to be noise from my brain, and that's totally fine. That's what makes it fun, right? Like, it's not all like threads to get followers. It's having fun on the internet as well.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a big part as well. And it goes back to what we were saying about failure, but it's almost a guarantee that if someone's listening to this right now, if you try any of the stuff that we're saying, you're going to fail at least once or twice, and it's going to happen, and you need to get it out of your system, because I've definitely learned that, at least even just from writing. Like the same with podcasting. I did about 5 podcast episodes before the first one that I actually published, just because I know that the first 5 are going to be rubbish like this. And the more you do, the more you can look back and be like, yeah, that was not good.
Yeah. Yeah, no, same. Me and my guy I think we recorded like 3 or 4 episodes of the first version of our podcast that just like, we just never like hit upload.
Yeah.
And it wasn't for the sake of practicing. It was because we didn't have the balls to hit upload, because I think I'm like pretty fearless about a lot of things, but like putting myself out there and talking on the internet was like not one of those for a long time, because it is a weird chasm to cross into like, hey, I'm calling and I have things to say. That's a weird place to get. But it's fun when you get there.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that is how you figure out what good looks like, because you won't actually know until you know what bad looks like. You have to figure out or at least what mediocre looks like. Once you've, I think even like a baseball analogy, right? You can't increase your batting average if you haven't hit any low numbers. Like to increase your batting average, you need to have an average.
Yeah.
You need to have stuff that's below and you have stuff that's above. And then you just keep getting more stuff that's above.
Yeah, you can't think about it. Yeah, you have to swing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that kind of sums up everything that we've been talking about, right? Just taking big swings and just trying things and seeing what works and figuring things out and being authentic to yourself as well.
Amen.
I love that, man. But yeah, thanks a lot for making the time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks a ton for having me. You should, we're getting our act together on our podcast for a next round of like where we have guests and not just the 3 of us. And would love to have you come and do the Builders Build podcast with us.
Yeah, that'll be awesome, man. Yeah, let's talk about building stuff. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please do stay tuned for more. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. It really helps the podcast. And follow me on Twitter. Feel free to shoot me any thoughts. See you next time.